HVAC 360 is brought to you today by
The Dark Side Employment Agency. Do you hate feeling like a rebel at work? Want to choke those shiny, overly happy coworkers? Consider coming over to the Dark Side Employment Agency. We'll have you work with one of our placement specialists, either James, Earl, or Jones, and they'll be happy to find you a position fit for an emperor, with many chances for advancement for those who are mentally gifted. The Dark Side Employment Agency. We're a force to be reckoned with.
Warning, signing contracts with the Dark Side Employment Agency may cause side effects such as wearing capes, megalomania, and or loss of limb. Hey, what's up? Welcome back. This is episode number 100. Yay! All right. Wow. Matt Nelson here, your host for HVAC 360, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. And how exactly do we do that? Well, 100 episodes, we talk about sharing lessons learned, and we interview industry experts. But we really don't stop there. If you want to go over to HVAC360.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you get a double dose of weekly HVAC education. Join this growing community of people just like you. So, what's up for this week? This week for HVAC 360, I just wanted to share a little behind the scenes and share some highlights and stories from our first 100 shows. And of course, give a special thanks to you, the listeners. I really do appreciate you listening. I started as a fan of podcasts back around the early 2005, and things have changed so much since then, and really, they evolved. I appreciate, over the years, a lot of the feedback and the notes from each one of you. If you want to send me a note directly, go ahead. It's Matt at HVAC360.com. You can still see some of the earlier episodes at Matt at buildingx.co. That still works, but I've kind of transitioned and upgraded in these last 25 episodes. And all the reviews in iTunes or now Apple Podcasts, those really help me. It encourages me, just because I know that there's somebody out there listening. So I really do appreciate each and every one of you. You are the top 3% that I've said many times. So what am I going to do today? I hope you enjoyed those intros. I've done those intros probably not since the very beginning of this latest set of 25 episodes, but it's been about 15 or 20 or so. So I'm thinking about releasing those separately just because they're something fun and entertaining that people might like above and beyond what we just do for the podcast. So it might reach a wider audience. So stay tuned for that. Really, these last 25 episodes, they really flew by. I took a look at the numbers and I'm like, wow, I really just, I've been issuing a lot of podcasts since I restarted this. And it hasn't always been consistent. There's the month of July that I took off, and I still, like every single one of you out there, you have a day job, you're trying to get things done, and sometimes things just don't work out, including this episode, number 100, which is probably delayed a week, but hey, it's here now, so you get to enjoy it. So what did I want to talk about a little bit about my highlight reel of the 100 episodes. I guess first off, a lot of you kind of, I at least heard one person have the feedback of, hey, you know what? I'm glad you kept the same opening, even though when I changed it up a little bit and did the fake sponsor bit. It's funny that since I started using that, I was watching HGTV, or actually, no, it wasn't HGTV. It was DIY Network. And there was this show called I Hate My Kitchen. And it was weird. It was the weirdest feeling because I was watching it, and all of a sudden I hear this theme song, and I'm like, I know that. I'm like, that's from my podcast. I'm like, oh, So, hey, you know what? That happens. I'm around. I don't think that show, I Hate My Kitchen, is still around, but it's still lingering. It's very weird to hear something that you picked out on a national network. That's really quite amazing. Anyway, let's get into it. So, episode number 1. If you haven't listened to anything, I'll go ahead and listen to episode number 1. That was what I misspoke. Episode number 0. I entitled it number 0, kind of like Guideline 0. Let's start at the beginning. And that was the prologue. That was kind of a description of where I wanted to take this journey of this podcast. And really, I guess the neat thing is I really haven't changed too much in the way I feel. I've always known that there's a lot of people out there that really want and need this information to get to the next level. And over the years that I've been doing this, there hasn't been a lot of people to join me. There are a few podcasts out there, and we'll touch on those later. But for the most part, I'm just here to give you a specific type of information, trying to make you, again, be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. All right. So, over the first couple of episodes, I guess some of the highlights there are just the feeling and the going to the AHR Expo floor. If you've never been there, go at least once, see it. It's a great place to get questions answered. And I went back there in 2010 was the first time that I went, and I actually recorded. And I actually was weird because I got in there as press, and that was kind of again, this is kind of behind the scenes. It was really weird to I have a podcast, and I'm like I had a number of episodes, and I'm like, okay, here let's go to the HR Expo show, and I'm press. And it was like, it wasn't a big deal. It actually, it's interesting that a lot of the magazines, a lot of the periodicals, whether they be, U.S.-based, Canadian-based, or international, they all have representatives there. And there's still not a lot of new media that shows up there. There's a few people that do show up, but for the most part, it's still your traditional periodical and news organizations. So that was kind of it was strange, and I was very nervous going to the first, because it's like, I'm just an engineer, what am I doing here? But I guess I'm press now. So, but that was certainly fun. That was a great thing I did there. As far as an experience goes. And, I really did it because I wanted to make sure, I wanted to give you that sense of what it was like to be on the floor of the HR Expo, because I didn't see that being done a lot. I see that more and more. There's now a lot of, if you go to the YouTube videos, there's probably a lot of people that do it from the floor of the HR Expo, and they have, similar interviews from what I've done. And I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit about, the value there, and it's kind of neat to hear that stuff. But, am I going to do it again? I'm not sure. If you want to give me some feedback on if you like those episodes, or you're just like, you know what, I'd like to hear more lessons learned, more interviews with industry experts, I'm certainly open to feedback. I guess from that show, a couple of things pop out at me. I love the smart chiller. That was one that I'm like, I went up to who I was interviewing, and I'm like, where are we going to have this? Just sitting there with my tape recorder, and, it was just, the booth layout. And I'm like, hey, you know what? You have this smart chiller running over here with the turbo core compressors. Let's like lean up against it and have a conversation. And that's how that particular interview went. If you want to know how quiet a smart chiller is, go to that episode. All these are pretty short. So go and take a look at what that was and what that sounded like. Another interesting one was getting to talk with one of the ARCOM representatives. They're the people that do specs. That's their business. They sell specs. But, and a lot of people would be like, boring, yawner. I find it exciting because I know a little bit more about specifications than most people, most engineers, I believe. And it's really, if you haven't dug into the ARCOM information, the information that goes along with that license, it's really, really neat information. And, there's a lot of engineers out there that'll just copy and paste, and they'll fall into that trap, and they won't update their specs regularly. Of course, you don't want to be like that. You want to make sure your specs are, really tight, and they're really useful to you when you go through a job. So, after that, I guess, the next episode that really jumps out at me, episode number 8. And that was my interview with President Gordon Holness. Now, one of the, and I'm sure in the prologue, I talked about this a little bit, but just getting to hear the president's, the ASHRAE president's message, wasn't something that you'd always get to hear, unless you went to the show, unless the president came to your chapter meeting. You wouldn't be able to actually hear the message of the president. That's changed over the years now that they're actually, I think they're broadcasting, or at least have it on YouTube or somewhere on the ASHRAE website. Maybe I can make a note of that and link that in on the show notes. But I will put that in and see if we can get like Bjarne Olsen's, his speech, because it was pretty good. So that was the thing. Now, this episode, he had come to our local chapter and given a speech, and I was going to interview him. I asked to interview him the next day, so I went over to the hotel where I was going to interview him, and, we talked for a long time, and the one thing that happened, like, almost immediately, this is like 101 journalism, I ran out of batteries, and I'm like, oh, man, I ran out of batteries, so I put in more batteries. Those were dead. I'm like, this can't be happening. And the hotel wasn't conveniently located. Some of them, as you can imagine, I actually had to walk down the street and get more batteries from a gas station and then go back. I'm like, sorry, Gordon, I'm going to have to put you on pause. I'm going to have to go out to this gas station, go get more batteries, and then come back in. So that was kind of embarrassing. He was more than understanding, and he was, very, very gracious with his time. But that, it's a long interview, but it was certainly one of the great interviews that I had early on. Now my next favorite, which was number 9, right after I talked to Gordon, I set up an interview with a local industry icon. Here in Cleveland, Jim Wickert is kind of larger than life. He is one of those people that, has really been around and has made an impact on the engineering community, with no doubt, and even an engineering community beyond just, the Cleveland, Ohio, Northeast Ohio kind of area. He is one of those people that, really kind of, he was the kind of people that I wanted to make the podcast for, or at least interview him for other people, because I know that there's this brain drain, this lack of, archived knowledge out there. And it was, people like Jim Wickert. There was people like a couple people that I didn't get to interview that I really had on my list that slipped through my fingers. And it was a pain point early on that I never really got a chance to interview some of the, the local icons, the people who actually made the industry. And if you ever get to talk to these people, it's really something special. So that was kind of, my episode number 9. That was a favorite one for me. All right, now moving on, episode number 12. And really, we're kind of a third of the way through. I'm not going to talk about each and every episode, but I do want to highlight the interview with the late ASHRAE president, Lynn Bellinger. This was an interview that I did with her, and this one was so weird because, she's so nice. She came and spoke at our local ASHRAE chapter. I caught up with her on the phone a little while later, and then not too much after that, maybe a month or two, she passed away, which was, it's a real hit to the leadership of ASHRAE and the example that she provided and I'm really, I'm saddened by her loss, and she just is a great person, and I really appreciated the interview that I had with her. So the timing was good, and I really appreciated it. Episode number 19, David Underwood. David Underwood, who is from Canada. Yay, eh? David is one of the people that I've worked with on a number of projects for the ASHRAE Society, and I've had a pretty good friendship with him. He is one of my favorites. If there was anything about refrigeration, if I had a question, let's just put it this way, if I had a question about refrigeration, David's the one that I would go to call up. He probably knows more. He's probably forgotten more about refrigeration than me and 10 other people combined. So he was a really great interview. Episode number 26 was my first international across the pond interview with SIPC President Andy Ford. That was it's great to be able to know that you can kind of connect with industry people across, in a different country. And, frankly, as an engineer, it was kind of intimidating. If you go back and listen to the episode and the kind of projects that he was working on, and the kind of the energy savings and the kind of, just high profile jobs, it really was kind of intimidating for me. Just being, from the interviews or from the project experience that I have, I'm like, whoa, you really know your stuff. So that was super great. Episode number 37, my interview with Paul Torsellini about net zero. This was actually my first listener request for a guest, or a topic rather, for net zero. And Michael, who was actually, he's from Poland. He moved to either, I want to say Ireland, but it might be Scotland. It was in the upper UK, from what I remember. But he had thrown that over. He's like, hey, can you get some more net zero? I'm really interested in net zero. And I tracked down Paul Torsellini, which, again, listen to the episode, but he is the be-all, end-all of net zero and things like that. Episode number 48, the HVAC refrigerants. That was a really great primer. I love that interview with Dr. Eckhart Grohl. That was, if you want to know about refrigerants, that's still relevant. Obviously there's some phase-out things that are changing nowadays, but that is a great primer. Episode number 53 with Chris Mathis. If you ever get a chance to talk with Chris Mathis from Ashland, North Carolina, he is a really great speaker, and he's doing the circuit. He's out there. He's talking. If you YouTube him, I don't know. Maybe I can YouTube him and post some links. But there's bound to be something on Chris talking about his honeybees, and it was great to be able to interview Chris. Number 68, I'll mention this in embarrassment, the thermostat operation. Now, I haven't been one to be able to listen back to my episodes. It's kind of a little bit, self-conscious. Didn't really like doing it, but I know that there was some... I knew that number 68 on thermostat operation wasn't quite right. And I listened back to it recently, and holy cow, I could not get through it. It was so unbelievably bad. So for number 68, I deeply apologize. In fact, I will redo an episode on thermostats in the near future, but that was, oh my... I tried to use a metaphor, and it made sense in my brain, but when it came out of my mouth, it just did not help one bit. It was crazy. It was one of the most unlistenable podcasts that I've actually put out there. Number 73, HVAC and the BSME. This was a great episode, just because I'm doing a kind of a think back on what it took to become, get the Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. What we do is not rocket science. And I know I've had employees in the past who have been intimidated by the fact that they weren't engineers. And this is not one of those industries where you have to be intimidated. Experience goes a long way. Communication goes a long way. There's a lot of things that matter a lot more than what you learned in college. A lot of what you learn on the job is, practically speaking, more important. Again, one of my favorites, just because I think it's important for people to understand that, hey, don't be intimidated by HVAC engineers. They come in all varieties. Everybody's an expert in a different kind of way. That's why you never talk down to anybody who's a building operator. You don't talk down to people who's a welder. That's because it's important to understand that they are an expert at what they do. Their skill, their knowledge runs deep in a couple of specific topics and skills, and you can glean so much from what they have to say. So never discount anybody that you run into out in the field or whatever. And to be blunt, there's some engineers out there that are just plain knuckleheads. That I wouldn't trust to wire my house or design an HVAC system for my house. Something so simple, I'd say no. Give me somebody else. Somebody in the trades could probably do a much better job of doing that and sizing it. Number 76. Got a couple more of these. With Comfy, this was actually this was my last posted episode for about 3 years. When I look back on that, I'm like, 3 years? I'm like, it was really that long? But, time just gets away from you. That's why it's important. If you're going to do something, just go ahead and do it. It's kind of like the thermostat operation. You know what? I'm leaving that out there until I get around to changing it, hopefully soon. But, you just have to go out and you produce episode after episode. You have to do your project. You have to learn about things. You just have to do it. Otherwise, you blink and all of a sudden 3 years have gone by, and that is just unbelievable. I guess the one thing I like about Comfy, especially, was the fact that their episode or their podcast, and I don't know whether that was because it was the last episode that people would see as basically the quote unquote first episode that would be on iTunes or any sort of Google Play or Stitcher or whatever you're using. They were the first one listed there, so I don't know if that made their popularity or they were actually using that as a marketing piece, but it was very popular, and I like the fact that they're still around. They're still doing what they're doing, and I was just listening to the Building Edifice Complex podcast with Andrew Muggleton and Robert Bean, and they had mentioned something in that same vein, like polling the occupants to understand if they're comfortable. And that's exactly what Comfy's doing. So, and they see that as one of those, upcoming trends. So it was kind of exciting. I can definitely say that wasn't the case. I had some interviews in the can, so to speak, with other companies, and they actually pivoted and changed what they were doing. One was kind of a location-based kind of, where are your techs now? And they switched to find a provider near you. So I actually never released those episodes. I had an interview that I never got to. But I did actually manage to post those episodes. Now, including in that is episode number 79, Kevin Callahan with Allerton. That was an awesome podcast, and I kick myself because not getting that out sooner, that is a nice deep dive into kind of controls. I wouldn't say a deep dive, but it's a nice overview. Controls are something that are definitely very, very technical, and I'd love to get into it a little bit more on this podcast, or maybe even a YouTube video. Who knows? So that one I wish I would have published a little bit earlier. And then there was the last 20. So of the last 20, I love number 88. I got the second go around with our first two-time interviewee, Paul Torsellini. So this was on the Advanced Energy Design Guidelines for Net Zero, K through 12. And that was very, very special. Love talking to Paul. And speaking of the edifice complex, I got to talk to Robert Bean in episode number 94 and 95. I kind of split that one up just because it was too long for one. I wanted to give people a break, and I tried to find a good split between talking about building science and building comfort and building environment and the radiant mean problem that I wanted to specifically talk to Robert about. That's why I first kind of engaged him, because of the different projects that I was seeing that just were going so wrong. And again, radiant mean is something that you should take a look at if you're a designer. That should be in your toolbox. So I guess during those 3 years, I really was, I always kept I still, maintained listening to podcasts, listening to books, listening to, it's your drive time education. Whether you're working out, whether you're driving to a job site, it's always a good thing to kind of fill your head with more knowledge and not necessarily just kind of like listen to mindless music. And hopefully I was educating people and being beneficial along the way. And I appreciate those emails during that 3-year period, because I'm like, okay, maybe I'm going to start it now. But it really wasn't until the beginning of this year when I really tried to make a concerted effort to revamp the podcast and to get everybody back up again, and just generally improving the sound quality. I'm a little bit fickle on that. I wanted to be able to continually improve the sound quality for you, because as a consumer of audio material, I understand what it's like to, try to drive a car that's a little bit noisy and you get a lot of road noise, and it's very highly variable. I know there's a couple of podcasts out there that I put out that, I tried very desperately to correct for the, whether it be Skype, whether it be, Skype call. It just, there was nothing I could do about it. So I do my very best. At least I will sound decent, and you will be able to understand me. And hopefully the intent of my guest or wherever I interview, I always try to interview them on the phone to get the best possible signal, so they're not cutting out or something like that. So I guess, within the last year or so, I've really seen a resurgence in podcasting. Now the Edifice Complex that came out, they kind of put those out every 2 weeks. That's a good one, a good technical one for engineers or people in the commercial building arena. I like listening to that one. And there's also a slew of HVAC technician podcasts out there, and there's probably at least 5 or 6 that are out there now. And I guess if I have to kind of tip my hat to one of the people that really, started, that kind of took over my top spot, as, if you typed in HVAC in iTunes, I was up there for a long time, but when Brian Orr with HVAC School came along, he totally, bumped me off. So I'm hardly anywhere to be found. You got to look past the HVAC School to be able to find my podcast now. But hey, that's great. I'm all for educating people, and it's not like we have the same audience. So I'm really if Brian Orr, if you're listening, great job. So, and there's also been a couple of YouTubers that I've been, focusing on, as I might actually start issuing this on YouTube. So that there've been a couple technicians there as well. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap of my first 100 episodes. I hope you had fun. This is maybe you learned something, but maybe it wasn't something that you're gonna, apply in your job. But I hope you'll learn something. I hope this was helpful to you. Hope it was entertaining at least. If you're not a subscriber, again, go over to HVAC 360, sign up for that mailing list. You'll get the double dose of goodness every week. And at least if I ever skip a podcast, and I'm almost to every, once a week for a year, I've been issuing that newsletter, and I think I'm getting some good feedback on it. So it's people just like you who are listening to it or taking a look at it, reading it. It's pretty short, has some good information on it, a couple of links maybe, and if there's some information as far as continuing education, I always post that on there. So if I want to communicate with you, that's probably what I'm going to do. So with that, if you are interested in leaving an iTunes review or Apple Podcast review, I would greatly appreciate that. I would greatly appreciate a 5-star review and a review. That always helps other people find the podcast. And that's about it. If you do leave one of those, I will give you a shout out on the show. So that's kind of a standing thing that I've always been doing for the last whole bunch of years, since 2010. So I'm coming up on, it'll be almost my 9th year, with some breaks in there, understand. But my 9th year having this podcast published in iTunes. So, wow, it just kind of blows my mind. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of HVAC 360. I'm your host again, Matt Nelson, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. Here's to another 100 episodes, and as always, know what you build and share what you know.